Hello and welcome to another Hand Drink Solo Wine Info video, and today we're doing a little bit of American wine history revision. Now, it's generally fairly widely accepted that America has made wine for 400 years or so, but the question that no one seems to answer is whether or not any of that wine was actually worth drinking. For centuries, it was not. If you take a slightly closer look at American wine history, and even American wine historians will agree, many of those earlier bottles were at best forgettable and at worst diabolically bubonic. You see, what happened was that early European settlers would try making wine in areas like Virginia using local species of vine, Vitis riparia, Vitis labrusca, and really the fruit that came off those vines tasted foxier than Jessica Rabbit in a two-piece. And what does foxy even taste like? Well, that's a trauma that we'll have to discuss on another day. Now, the real shift started in America in 1769 when Vitis vinifera vines were actually planted, and many see that as the symbolic birth of the American wine industry. But really, that date is practically meaningless because virtually none of those vines planted in the 18th century survived what happened next, which was, in the 1800s, phylloxera, which struck practically every single Vitis vinifera vine in the United States. And just as the American wine industry was getting back on its feet after phylloxera, then prohibition came flying off the top rope like Rey Mysterio when he teamed up with Batista. What happened in the wine industry was that wine grapes were ripped out, table grapes were planted, and all of that winemaking skill that is generally passed from artisan to apprentice was metaphorically defenestrated. And so you actually had to fast forward all the way to the 1930s before America really started making wine out of Vitis vinifera, but it was jug wine. The kind of jug wine that makes the Kool-Aid man look like a certified sommelier serving Burgundy Grand Cru. Oh yeah! While none of these Vitis vinifera-based wines were foxy tasting, one could still argue they weren't necessarily worth drinking either. And so essentially, it was only in 1960 when Sonoma and Napa started exploding as wine-producing regions. Robert Mondavi got involved along with a few other personalities. And this was really the first time in modern American history when wine made its way into a bottle that even vaguely resembled the sort of wines coming out of California today. Now, the reason that all of this weird, rather uncharitable American history is relevant is because today's Hand Drink Solo Curious Wine of the Day is produced by a team of winemakers who have made it their mission to not only protect but also showcase a series of South African vineyards, almost all of which are older than most of the vines that are in America today. And the wine in the limelight is the Roodekrantz Sandy Slopes White Blend made from a mix of Chenin Blanc and Semillon, produced by the winemaking team of Marius Berger Sr. and Marius Berger Jr. The Roodekrantz team really are a fascinating group of winemakers, and perhaps partly because I don't even think they would call themselves winemakers, because when you sit down and talk to them, what comes out first is not cellar talk or grape geekery, but rather history, heritage, and obsession with these incredible vineyards that they've discovered. It's almost as if bottles of wine are only rarely involved because everyone can agree that that is possibly the best medium through which to tell the stories of these incredible vineyards. I guess if I were to be dramatic, I'd say that wine was now a necessary evil needed to tell the story. Now, I have produced a rather lengthy video that details many of the vineyards that they work with and showcase just how important the Roodekrantz message is and how versatile still wine Chenin Blanc can be coming out of various regions in South Africa. But perhaps a relevant question would be to ask, well, if they are Chenin Blanc specialists, then why on earth is today's wine of the day a Semillon Chenin Blanc blend? As it turns out, there is not just one answer to that question, but two. In South Africa, there are a growing number of really spectacular Chenin Blanc and Semillon blends coming out of various regions around South Africa. I sat with a group of South African sommeliers just last month, and time again, when interviewing them, this was the category of wine that was exciting them the most. And perhaps what's interesting about it is that there doesn't really seem to be any region in the world which is inspiring the combination of these two cultivars. So why have they been blended? In my mind, the first answer is philosophical more than it is technical. And that is to say that Chenin Blanc and Semillon are about as close to a heritage white blend as you could possibly get in South Africa. Chenin Blanc is South Africa's most famous white cultivar and also its most planted white cultivar. And Semillon is arguably the oldest white cultivar to have been established in South Africa. Not only is the oldest vine alive in South Africa today, a Semillon vine, but at a certain point over 300 years ago, Semillon made up between 80 and 90% of the entire South African national vineyard. So you have the longest standing established cultivar and South Africa's most critically acclaimed cultivar being blended together. I mean, that is pure heritage in a bottle, and I'm excited to see more and more of those come out. There's also a slightly more technical, I guess, sensorial reason for these two cultivars to be blended together. But rather than have me share my thoughts on that, I thought we'd just hear directly from Marius Jr. and his take on why these two cultivars from two very particular vineyards work so incredibly well.
We have this beautiful Semillon vineyard just next to Eben and Lammershoek on the Paardeberg. It's on a mid-slope and it was just so beautiful. And we have this very linear Chenin Blanc vineyard planted in 73. Similar as the Clippers, it's a similar profile, high acidity. The Chenin is on the Malmesbury side of the Paardeberg, very mineral style, and the Semillon is just on the Paardeberg mountain slopes. The idea was actually just to see the influence that the Semillon will have, because we had this very racy linear wine, and the Semillon just broadens the mid palate and it brings beautiful characteristics. It just merged into a beautiful blend. We just had exactly the same quantity of Semillon and Chenin in barrels, so we blended the wine 50-50. It came out really good.
So now that we've heard multiple reasonings as to why Semillon and Chenin Blanc are such exciting blends, let's get into the glass and see what Dani and Marius have prepared for us. So if we give it a sniff, oh, and it's just so exciting. It really makes me quite happy. You have this gentle, almost waft of kind of lemon leaf, lemon blossom, and citrus zest. It's beautifully gentle and summery, and that kind of is the first thing that hits you. But underneath that comes a slightly surlier note that I think is a combination of slight reductive winemaking technique, which gives a kind of salty, flinty element, but then there's also a leesy touch to it as well. Now, at this point, you'd be forgiven for thinking, okay, well, if you've got citrus and herbal planty notes here, and you've got savory, sometimes slightly moody notes here, that could be quite an austere mix. But beautifully, down the middle, there is this incredibly articulate range of stone fruit that really spreads from nectarine to apricot to even a little bit of white peach. It's a beautifully articulate nose where even beginner wine tasters who perhaps struggle to articulate what they're smelling can get to grips with it, because each sensory note just displays itself so clearly. So let's give it a sip and see what it's like on the palate. Well, man, you can totally see exactly what Marius was talking about when he was discussing the juxtaposition of the two vineyards next to each other. Because almost in a reversal of what we experienced on the nose, you have an entry that shows gentle, quite sweet stone fruit. And as you hold the wine on the tongue, you really do experience the sweetness of the peach and the nectarine. But then almost as you let the wine roll off the tongue towards your jowls, there's like this explosion of live wire citrus acidity. So you're experiencing it kind of in the reverse order that you smelt it first. I'm not at any point saying that the tongue map is still a thing. That's been thoroughly debunked. What I'm saying is when you hold the wine in your tongue, you generally sense that stone fruit, and then as it rolls off, you get that snap of citrus, which is gorgeous. It's like an explosion of Nachi sherbet, but also some of that Seville orange, and of course that classic textbook snap of white grapefruit at the end. And then through it all is that little seam of saline or saltiness, almost like the orange rind has just been salted just before you snap it with some sipping tequila. And for those of you who perhaps aren't used to talking about salt in wine, or you haven't drunk a lot of South African Chenin Blanc, it's not unlike that beautiful savory element that comes with some of the best Verdellos. So that's all we have time for today, but I'm going to leave you links to two videos, one of which is that rather lengthy but really quite comprehensive list of vineyards that Roodekrantz work with and their winemaking ethos. And the other video is another South African white blend, which again features both Semillon and Chenin Blanc. Until next time, stay curious and always drink niche.